Black judge overturns verdict reveals she knew the defendant's past. The gavel struck with finality, silencing the packed courtroom. Judge Elaine Montgomery's dark eyes swept over the scene before her, 12 jurors avoiding her gaze, a prosecutor with a barely concealed smirk, and the defendant, Marcus Wilson, a young black man whose face had just collapsed in disbelief at the guilty verdict. "The jury is dismissed with the court's thanks," Judge Montgomery announced, her voice betraying nothing of the storm brewing within her. As the courtroom began to empty, she made a decision that would upend her 20-year career. Counsel approached the bench. The prosecutor and defense attorney exchanged confused glances before stepping forward. "This court is setting aside the jury's verdict," Judge Montgomery stated flatly. The prosecutor's jaw dropped. "Your Honor, on what grounds?" Judge Montgomery removed her glasses, revealing eyes hardened by years on the bench. "On the grounds that I knew the defendant years ago." Her voice remained steady even as gasps rippled through the remaining spectators. "I should have recused myself. I did not, and now I must correct that ethical breach." "When did you recognize him?" the defense attorney asked, stunned. "The moment he walked into my courtroom," Judge Montgomery replied. "But by then, the wheels of justice were already in motion." As security prepared to lead Marcus back to holding, his eyes locked with the judge's. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that transcended the sterile confines of the justice system. A history neither had acknowledged until this moment. Judge Montgomery gathered her robes and stood. "Court is adjourned until tomorrow, when I will formally recuse myself and request a mistrial." With those words, she retreated to her chambers, knowing that her decision would not only change Marcus Wilson's fate, but would force her to confront the complex intersection of justice, memory, and the moral code she had sworn to uphold. The question hanging in the air was clear. What exactly did Judge Montgomery know about Marcus Wilson's past that would compel her to risk everything? Elaine Montgomery had not always been Your Honor. 27 years ago, she was Ms. Montgomery, a dedicated third-grade teacher at Riverside Elementary in the heart of Detroit's struggling East Side. It was there that she first met 8-year-old Marcus Wilson. In her chambers, Elaine closed her eyes, the memory washing over her with uncomfortable clarity. Marcus had been small for his age, with intelligent eyes that seemed to assess everything and everyone with wary caution. His school uniform was always impeccably clean, though she noticed it was often the same shirt and pants day after day. "Ms. Montgomery, I finished the extra credit," young Marcus had said one day, placing a carefully written paper on her desk. His handwriting, though childish, showed remarkable attention to detail. "This is excellent work, Marcus," she'd told him, genuinely impressed. "You have a real gift for storytelling." The shy smile that bloomed across his face in response had stayed with her all these years later. Elaine opened her eyes and stared at the case file on her desk. Commonwealth v. Wilson, armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon. The prosecution's case had hinged on eyewitness testimony and circumstantial evidence. The defense had argued mistaken identity, pointing to the generic description that could have matched thousands of young black men in the city. The jury hadn't deliberated long before returning with a guilty verdict, too quickly in Elaine's estimation, though she'd been careful to maintain her judicial poker face. A knock at her chamber door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called. Catherine Reynolds, her judicial assistant for the past 5 years, stepped in with concern etched across her face. "Judge, the press is already gathering outside. Your decision, it's causing quite a stir." Elaine nodded. "I expected as much." The chief judge called. "He wants to see you immediately." Of course he did. Chief Judge William Hargrove had been gunning for a spot on the federal bench for years. A scandal in his court was the last thing he needed. "Tell him I'll be there shortly," Elaine replied, rising from her chair. Catherine hesitated. "Judge, may I speak freely?" "Always. I've worked with you long enough to know you don't make impulsive decisions. Whatever your history with this defendant, you must have compelling reasons for what you did in there." Catherine's loyalty was touching, but Elaine knew it wouldn't shield her from what was coming. "Thank you, Catherine, but this isn't your burden to bear." As her assistant left, Elaine gathered the Wilson case file and a small leather-bound journal from her desk drawer. For 2 decades, she had kept meticulous notes on every case that crossed her bench, not just the legal arguments and evidence, but her personal observations and reflections. It was a practice frowned upon by some of her colleagues who preferred the illusion of perfect objectivity, but Elaine had always believed that acknowledging her humanity made her a better judge, not a compromised one. She flipped to her entries on the Wilson case, reading her own words. Day 1, defendant entered courtroom. Immediate recognition. Marcus Wilson, my former student from Riverside Elementary. Ethical dilemma, recuse or proceed. Decision, proceed. No contact in 20-plus years. No current relationship. Can maintain impartiality. How arrogant those words seemed now. How naive. Elaine closed the journal and slipped it into her bag. The Wilson case had seemed straightforward at first glance. A convenience store robbery gone wrong, the clerk pistol-whipped and hospitalized. Security footage too grainy to provide a clear identification. A witness who claimed to have seen the perpetrator fleeing. Marcus Wilson arrested 3 blocks away, no weapon found, no stolen cash recovered. What had troubled her from the beginning was how neatly it all fit the prosecutor's narrative. Too neatly, perhaps. The kind of case that reinforced existing biases about young black men in the criminal justice system. As she prepared to face Chief Judge Hargrove, Elaine wondered if her recognition of Marcus had unconsciously influenced her assessment of the evidence. And if so, was she any better than the jurors who had so quickly convicted him? "You've created a judicial nightmare, Elaine." Chief Judge Hargrove didn't bother with pleasantries as she entered his office. His tall frame towered over his mahogany desk, salt and pepper hair perfectly coiffed as always. "I made a difficult but necessary decision, William," Elaine replied, taking a seat without waiting for an invitation. "Necessary?" Hargrove scoffed. "You announced in open court that you knew the defendant and failed to recuse yourself. Do you have any idea what the appellate court will do with that? They'll order a new trial as they should. And what about your career? The Judicial Conduct Committee will have a field day with this." Elaine met his gaze steadily. "I'm prepared for the consequences." Hargrove sank into his chair, his anger giving way to calculation. "How well did you know this Wilson character? He was my student, 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary. That was what, 25 years ago? 27. And you recognized him immediately? After all that time?" Elaine considered the question. Had she recognized Marcus immediately? There had been something familiar about him from the moment he'd been led into her courtroom, but it wasn't until he'd spoken, answering the clerk's questions about his name and date of birth, that recognition had fully crystallized. "Yes," she said simply, offering no further explanation. Hargrove studied her for a long moment. "There's more to this story than you're telling me. There's more to every story, William. That's why we have trials instead of summary judgments." His eyes narrowed. "Did you maintain contact with him over the years?" "No, I left teaching to attend law school after that year. I never saw or spoke to him again until he appeared in my courtroom." "Then why the dramatic gesture? You could have quietly recused yourself after the verdict and let the appeals process work." It was a fair question, one Elaine had asked herself repeatedly in the hours since she'd made her decision. "Because the system failed him," she said finally, "and I was part of that failure." Hargrove leaned back, his expression softening slightly. "Elaine, we've known each other for 15 years. You're one of the most principled judges on this bench, but this feels personal in a way that concerns me." "It is personal," Elaine admitted, "but not in the way you think." Before she could elaborate, Hargrove's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and grimaced. "The DA is on his way up. Preston Davies himself, not just the prosecutor from your courtroom." Elaine wasn't surprised. Davies was a politically ambitious district attorney with a reputation for being tough on crime, a stance that played well with suburban voters, even if it sometimes trampled on due process. "I'd better go, then," she said, rising. "Not so fast." Hargrove gestured for her to remain seated. "We need to present a united front here. The integrity of the court is at stake." "The integrity of the court is precisely why I did what I did, William." Before Hargrove could respond, his assistant announced District Attorney Davies' arrival. The man who strode in radiated, controlled fury beneath his perfectly tailored suit. "Judge Montgomery," Davies began without preamble, "would you care to explain why you just undermined months of work by my office and made a mockery of the jury system?" "Mr. Davies," Elaine replied calmly, "I made a difficult decision based on ethical considerations that I am not at liberty to fully discuss at this time." "Not at liberty?" Davies' voice rose. "You publicly admitted to knowing the defendant. I knew him as a child, yes. And you said nothing during jury selection, during the entire trial. I believed I could remain impartial. And then suddenly, after the jury finds him guilty, you have an attack of conscience." Davies turned to Hargrove. "This is judicial misconduct, plain and simple." "That's enough, Preston," Hargrove interjected. "Judge Montgomery has acknowledged her error in not recusing herself earlier. She'll be filing the appropriate paperwork for a mistrial and recusal tomorrow morning." "That doesn't undo the damage," Davies insisted. "The victims deserve justice. The community deserves to feel safe. And defendants deserve fair trials," Elaine countered. Something I'm no longer convinced Marcus Wilson received in my courtroom. Davy's eyes flashed. Are you implying my office did something improper? I'm stating that I did something improper by not recusing myself, and that my impropriety may have tainted the proceedings. The room fell silent as the three legal professionals assessed one another. It was Hargrove who finally broke the tension. Judge Montgomery will be taking a voluntary leave of absence effective immediately, pending the Judicial Conduct Committee's review. He looked at Elaine. Isn't that right? It wasn't a question, and Elaine knew it. If you believe that's best for the court, yes. Davies seemed momentarily satisfied by this concession. And Wilson, he stays in custody pending retrial. That will be for the new judge to determine, Hargrove replied diplomatically. As the men continued discussing the procedural aftermath of her decision, Elaine's thoughts drifted back to young Marcus and the last time she'd seen him as a child. It had been field day at Riverside Elementary, an annual tradition of outdoor games and activities. Marcus had won the long-distance run, his thin legs carrying him effortlessly around the makeshift track as his classmates cheered. Afterward, she'd found him sitting alone beneath a tree, clutching his blue first-place ribbon. You should be celebrating with the others, she'd told him. Marcus had looked up at her with those serious eyes. Ms. Montgomery, are you leaving Riverside? The question had caught her off guard. She hadn't yet announced her departure to pursue law school. Who told you that? No one, I just noticed things. She'd sat down beside him. Yes, I am leaving. I've been accepted to law school. You'll be a good lawyer, he'd said with childish certainty. You always listen to both sides of the story. The memory faded as Davy's voice cut through her thoughts. The press is already spinning this as some kind of indictment of the system. Isn't it? Elaine couldn't help asking. Davy's face reddened. No, Judge Montgomery, it is not. It's an indictment of your judgment. Gentlemen, Elaine said, rising from her chair, I believe we've said all that needs to be said for now. I'll submit my formal recusal and request for mistrial in the morning. As she left Hargrove's office, Elaine felt a strange sense of liberation mingled with dread. Her career might be over, but for the first time in years, she felt as though she'd truly honored her oath to uphold justice. Now she needed to understand why. If you're enjoying this story of moral courage and difficult choices, please consider subscribing to Precipistories for more narratives that explore the complex intersection of ethics, memory, and justice. Your support helps us create thoughtful content that challenges and inspires. The media frenzy erupted exactly as Elaine had anticipated. By evening, her face was plastered across local news broadcasts, with pundits debating her decision from every possible angle. Some praised her integrity for admitting her potential bias, while others questioned her competence and judgment. Elaine ignored it all as she drove to a part of the city she hadn't visited in years. Riverside Elementary still stood, though the once bright brick had faded to a dull rust color, and chain-link fence now surrounded the playground where she'd watched Marcus win his race. She parked across the street, not entirely sure why she'd come. Perhaps to remember who she had been before law school, before the bench, when her connection to justice had been more intimate, more personal. Her phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Judge, call me when you can. Defense attorney Reynolds is trying to reach you. Elaine sighed. Speaking with Marcus's attorney would be ethically questionable at this point, yet she found herself dialing Catherine's number anyway. What exactly did Reynolds say? Elaine asked when her assistant answered. Only that it's urgent and relates to information not presented at trial, Catherine replied. I told him you couldn't discuss the case, but he was insistent. Elaine watched as children began streaming out of Riverside's doors, the school day ending. Did he leave a number? Yes, but Judge, you know you can't. I'm not going to discuss the case with him, Elaine interrupted. But if there's exculpatory evidence that wasn't presented, I need to know about it. After getting Reynolds' number from Catherine, Elaine sat in her car debating whether to make the call. Her judicial ethics training was clear. Once recused, a judge should have no further involvement in a case. Yet something about the Wilson trial had felt wrong from the beginning, even before she'd recognized Marcus. Finally, she dialed the number. Reynolds, a voice answered on the second ring. This is Judge Montgomery, Elaine said, keeping her tone professional. I understand you've been trying to reach me. Judge, thank you for calling back. Reynolds sounded genuinely relieved. I know this is unusual, but there are circumstances. I can't discuss the Wilson case with you, Elaine cut in. I've recused myself. I understand that, Reynolds replied. But what I need to tell you doesn't relate to the legal aspects of the case. It's about Marcus himself. Elaine hesitated. Go on. He recognized you too, Judge, from the beginning. He asked me not to raise the issue because he believed you would be fair, fairer than another judge might be. The revelation stunned Elaine. He remembered me after all these years. Judge Montgomery, you were apparently one of the few adults who ever showed him genuine kindness. That makes an impression on a child. Elaine felt a tightness in her chest. Mr. Reynolds, why are you telling me this now? Because Marcus has information about the real perpetrator of the robbery. Information he was afraid to share because of potential retaliation. But after what you did in court today, Reynolds paused. He wants to talk to you. That's impossible, Elaine said firmly. Ethically, legally, in every way, that's impossible. I understand, but no, you clearly don't understand. Any contact between us could further compromise the case and guarantee that the real perpetrator, if it isn't Marcus, goes free. Reynolds was silent for a moment. What if I could arrange something, unofficial, through a third party? Are you asking me to participate in an ex-parte communication about a case from which I've recused myself? Elaine couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. I'm asking you to help prevent a miscarriage of justice, Reynolds countered. Marcus isn't the only one at risk here. What does that mean? It means there's more going on than a simple convenience store robbery, but Marcus won't talk to anyone but you. Elaine watched as the last of the children disappeared from Riverside's playground. I can't do what you're asking, Mr. Reynolds, you know that. Then let me ask you something else, Reynolds said. The teacher who inspired Marcus Wilson to trust in justice, is she still in there somewhere? Or has the judge completely taken over? The question struck Elaine like a physical blow. Before she could respond, Reynolds continued. There's a coffee shop called Bella's on Westmont Avenue. Marcus's grandmother goes there every morning at 9. She's not involved in the case in any way. If someone happened to be there tomorrow morning, she might share some family stories. With that, Reynolds hung up, leaving Elaine staring at her phone in disbelief. The ethical lines were clear. As a judge, even one on temporary leave, she should have no contact with anyone connected to the Wilson case. To do so would violate every principle of judicial conduct she'd upheld for 20 years. And yet, as she drove away from Riverside Elementary, Elaine couldn't stop thinking about the 8-year-old boy who had noticed things others missed, who had run with determination around a dusty track, and who had somehow remembered her all these years later. Bella's coffee shop was exactly the kind of neighborhood establishment that resisted gentrification through sheer force of personality. Mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and the rich aroma of freshly ground beans greeted Elaine as she entered at 8:45 the next morning. She ordered a cappuccino and selected a table in the corner with a view of the door, questioning her judgment with every passing minute. This wasn't just bending the ethical rules, it was potentially breaking them. Yet here she sat, waiting for the grandmother of a defendant from her courtroom. At precisely 9 o'clock, an elderly woman entered the shop. Though Elaine had never seen her before, something in the woman's dignified posture and observant eyes immediately reminded her of Marcus. This had to be his grandmother. The woman ordered her coffee and then, as if sensing Elaine's gaze, turned and looked directly at her. After a moment's consideration, she approached Elaine's table. Mind if I join you? She asked, her voice gentle but firm. Please, Elaine gestured to the empty chair. The woman sat down, studying Elaine with undisguised curiosity. I'm Vivian Wilson, Elaine Montgomery. I know who you are, Judge Montgomery. My grandson told me about you years ago and again more recently. Elaine raised an eyebrow. Years ago? Vivian nodded. Marcus came home from school one day insisting he was going to become a lawyer because his teacher, Ms. Montgomery, said he asked good questions and saw both sides of arguments. A smile touched her lips. He talked about you for weeks. The revelation sent an unexpected wave of emotion through Elaine. I had no idea I made such an impression. Teachers rarely do, Vivian replied, taking a sip of her coffee. Now I suspect you're not here for a trip down memory lane. Mrs. Wilson, I want to be clear, I can't discuss your grandson's case. It would be highly improper. I understand that, but there's nothing improper about an old woman sharing family stories, is there? Elaine hesitated. I suppose not. Good. Vivian settled more comfortably in her chair. Let me tell you about my grandson. Marcus was born to my daughter Tanya when she was just 17. Tanya tried her best, but by the time Marcus was 6, her struggles with addiction had become too much. I took him in. Elaine remembered the clean but repeated uniform, the serious eyes that seemed older than they should have been. He was always smart, Vivian continued. Noticed everything, remembered everything, but life was hard for a boy in our neighborhood, especially one without a father. What happened after elementary school? Elaine asked, genuinely curious about the path that had led from the promising child she remembered to the defendant in her courtroom. Middle school was rough. High school was worse, but Marcus managed to graduate, even got accepted to community college. Pride shone in Vivian's eyes. He was studying criminal justice, if you can believe it, working part-time at the recreation center with younger kids. And then, Vivian's expression darkened. Then he started dating Shanice. Nice girl, but her brother Darius is mixed up with a crew that runs half the neighborhood. Drugs, protection rackets, you name it. Elaine maintained a neutral expression, though her mind was racing. None of this information had come up during the trial. 3 months ago, Darius asked Marcus to hold something for him. Marcus refused. A week later, the convenience store where Shanice worked was robbed. The same store from the case, Elaine murmured, then caught herself. I'm sorry, I shouldn't. Vivian waved away her concern. Judge, we both know why we're really here. Marcus was walking to the store to walk Shanice home when the robbery happened. He was 3 blocks away when the police picked him up. Mrs. Wilson, if your grandson is innocent, his attorney needs to present this evidence properly through legal channels. His attorney tried, Vivian replied sharply. But without Shanice or Darius willing to testify, it's just a theory. And neither of them will talk. Shanice because she's terrified, Darius because he's protecting someone. Protecting who? Vivian leaned forward. That's what Marcus figured out while he was in jail awaiting trial. The robbery wasn't Darius's idea. It was ordered by someone with a badge. Elaine nearly choked on her coffee. Are you suggesting police involvement? Not regular police. A detective named Carson works narcotics. Word is he's been on Darius's payroll for years, making evidence disappear, tipping off about raids. But lately he's been demanding a cut of everything that moves through the neighborhood. If this is true, it's a very serious accusation. Marcus has proof, Vivian said, or at least he knows where to find it, but he's not going to say a word to anyone unless he knows it will make a difference. And he thinks I can make that difference. I've recused myself from his case. He thinks you'll listen. That you'll care about the truth, not just about closing cases. Vivian reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is from Marcus. He asked me to give it to you. Elaine stared at the paper but didn't take it. Mrs. Wilson, I can't. It's not about his case, Vivian interrupted. It's a thank you note for being a teacher who believed in him. After a moment's hesitation, Elaine accepted the paper. I should go. Before you do, Vivian said, holding Elaine's gaze, my grandson wanted me to remind you of something you used to tell your class. Justice isn't just about following rules. It's about making sure the rules work for everyone, especially those without power. Elaine felt the weight of those words she had indeed spoken many times as an idealistic young teacher, before the complexities of the legal system had tempered her perspective. Thank you for the coffee chat, Mrs. Wilson, she said, rising from her chair. Thank you for listening, Judge Montgomery, Vivian replied. Not everyone would have. Outside Bella's, Elaine waited until she was in her car before unfolding the paper Vivian had given her. It wasn't a thank you note at all, but an address scrawled in hurried handwriting, followed by 3 words, Storage Unit 247. Proof. It took Elaine less than an hour to decide what to do with the information Marcus had provided. She couldn't investigate herself. That would cross every ethical line imaginable. But she could pass the information to someone who could. Judge Sarah Chen had been Elaine's colleague and friend for 15 years. Before her appointment to the bench, she had worked in the Public Integrity Unit of the DA's office, investigating corruption among public officials, including police. This is unexpected, Sarah said as Elaine joined her for lunch in a quiet corner of a restaurant far from the courthouse. I heard about what happened in your courtroom. The judicial gossip mill is working overtime. I'm sure it is, Elaine replied, keeping her voice low. Sarah, I need your help with something delicate. Sarah's expression grew serious. This is about the Wilson case, isn't it? Indirectly. Elaine hesitated, then forged ahead. I've received information suggesting police corruption connected to the case, specifically a narcotics detective named Carson who may be working with local drug dealers. And your source for this information? I can't say. Sarah studied her friend's face. Elaine, you know how dangerous this territory is if you're getting information from the defendant or his associates. I'm not asking you to take action based solely on what I'm telling you, Elaine interrupted. Just to look into it, quietly. What exactly am I looking for? Elaine slid a napkin across the table with the storage unit address written on it. Allegedly, there's evidence here. Sarah made no move to take the napkin. Evidence of what? I don't know the specifics, but if there's any truth to what I've heard, it could mean an innocent man is facing prison time while a corrupt officer continues to operate with impunity. And if there's nothing there, if this is just a desperate attempt by a guilty man to escape consequences, then no harm done, Elaine replied. You check, you find nothing, end of story. Sarah finally picked up the napkin, studied the address, then tucked it into her pocket. I must be crazy to even consider this. You're considering it because you care about justice as much as I do. Maybe, Sarah conceded. Or maybe I'm just a sucker for that idealistic gleam in your eye, the same one you had back in law school. Elaine smiled for the first time in days. I thought I'd lost that gleam somewhere along the way. It comes and goes, Sarah said, her expression softening, like faith itself. As they finished their lunch, the conversation shifted to safer topics: courthouse renovations, Sarah's daughter starting college, and upcoming judicial conference. But underneath the mundane discussion ran a current of tension, the weight of what Sarah had agreed to do hanging between them. When they parted outside the restaurant, Sarah squeezed Elaine's hand. Whatever happens, be prepared for the consequences. The system doesn't like being challenged, even when the challenge is justified. I know, Elaine replied, but I've already crossed that bridge. Yes, you have, Sarah agreed. The question now is whether it leads somewhere worth going. As Elaine watched her friend walk away, she wondered the same thing. 3 days passed with no word from Sarah. Elaine's formal recusal and request for mistrial had been processed, and the Wilson case had been reassigned to Judge Robert Tanaka. The Judicial Conduct Committee had scheduled a hearing for the following week, and Elaine had begun preparing her statement with the help of an attorney friend who specialized in legal ethics. On the morning of the 4th day, as Elaine was sorting through mail that had piled up during her absence from chambers, her phone rang. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. I need to see you, Sarah said without preamble. Not in public. Can you come to my house tonight, around 8? Of course, Elaine replied, heart racing. Did you find something? Not over the phone, Elaine, tonight. The hours until 8 o'clock stretched interminably. Elaine tried to focus on preparing for her ethics hearing, but her mind kept returning to the Wilson case, to Marcus as a child, to the storage unit address, to Detective Carson. Sarah lived in a well-maintained Tudor in one of the city's older, established neighborhoods. When Elaine arrived, she found her friend waiting on the front porch despite the evening chill. Let's walk, Sarah suggested, gesturing toward the tree-lined street. Once they were a block from the house, Sarah spoke. I went to that storage facility. Unit 247 was rented 6 months ago by a woman named Shanice Taylor. The name immediately registered. Marcus Wilson's girlfriend. Sarah nodded. I had to get creative to access it, calling in a favor from a former colleague in public integrity who owed me what we found. She trailed off, shaking her head. Tell me, Elaine urged. Audio recordings, dozens of them, conversations between Detective James Carson and various individuals, including someone named Darius, who I assume is this Shanice's brother. The recordings detail protection arrangements, payoffs, tip-offs about raids, but the most damning one. Sarah paused. It's Carson and Darius discussing the convenience store robbery, planning it. Elaine stopped walking. They planned it. Why? Apparently the store owner, a man named Collel, had refused to pay protection money. The robbery was meant to teach him a lesson. But things went wrong when the clerk, who turned out to be Shanice, recognized the robber despite his mask. And the robber was Carson himself, Sarah replied grimly. He pistol-whipped her to keep her quiet, not realizing who she was until afterward. When Darius found out, he was furious, but Carson threatened to implicate him in other crimes if he talked. And Marcus? Wrong place, wrong time. He was walking to the store to meet Shanice, just as she claimed. Carson saw him nearby, called in a description, and had patrol officers pick him up. A convenient scapegoat. Elaine felt physically ill. So everything Vivian Wilson told me was true. It appears so. Sarah's expression was troubled. Elaine, there's more. The recordings indicate this isn't an isolated incident. Carson has been running this operation for years with protection from someone higher up in the department. Who? That's not clear from what we found, but the implications are significant. Elaine resumed walking, her mind racing. What happens now? My contact has taken the evidence to the FBI. This level of corruption falls under their jurisdiction. They're moving carefully, building a case before making any arrests. And Marcus, he's still in jail, Sarah, still facing trial for a crime he didn't commit. The prosecutor will have to drop the charges once the FBI case breaks open, Sarah reasoned. But until then, an innocent man sits in jail while the real criminal remains free, Elaine finished. That's not justice. It's the system working as it can, not as it should, Sarah replied. The wheels turn slowly, especially when corruption is involved. Elaine stopped again, turning to face her friend. How long before the FBI acts? Days, maybe weeks. They need to identify everyone involved. That's too long. Sarah's expression hardened. Don't do anything rash, Elaine. You've already put your career at risk. If it becomes known that you were involved in this investigation, my career was at risk the moment I recognized Marcus Wilson in my courtroom. Elaine cut in. At least now I know I was right to trust my instincts. They walked in silence for several minutes before Sarah spoke again. What will you do? What I should have done from the beginning, Elaine replied. Ensure that justice is served regardless of the personal cost. If you're finding value in this exploration of moral complexity and the human side of justice, please consider subscribing to @ Persifistories. Your support enables us to create narratives that challenge assumptions and inspire meaningful reflection on the ethical dilemmas we all face. The Judicial Conduct Committee hearing was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. in a conference room at the courthouse. Elaine arrived 30 minutes early, her statement prepared, her resolve strengthened by what she had learned from Sarah. To her surprise, Catherine was waiting outside the conference room. "Judge," her assistant greeted her with evident relief. "I was hoping to catch you before the hearing. Catherine, you shouldn't be here. This isn't your concern. With all due respect, Judge, it became my concern when I watched you risk everything for a principal." Catherine handed Elaine a folder. "I thought you might want to see this before you go in." Elaine opened the folder to find printouts of news articles about Detective James Carson. Most were routine mentions of arrests or testimonies, but one from 3 years ago caught her eye. "Detective cleared in shooting of unarmed suspect." The suspect, Elaine noted with a chill, had been a young black man named Terrell Jackson. "Where did you get these?" "I did some research," Catherine replied. "Detective Carson has a pattern of questionable arrests involving young black men, particularly in the Riverside area. 12 in the past 5 years, all with similar circumstances, minimal evidence, eyewitness identifications that later proved problematic, charges that were eventually reduced or dismissed, but only after the defendants had spent months in jail." Elaine flipped through the articles, a sense of grim vindication washing over her. "This would have been helpful during the trial." "I know, I should have looked into it earlier." Catherine hesitated. "There's something else. I received a call this morning from the FBI. They want to speak with you." Before Elaine could respond, the door to the conference room opened and Chief Judge Hargrove emerged. "Judge Montgomery," he said, his tone formal. "The committee is ready for you." Elaine handed the folder back to Catherine. "Thank you for everything." Inside the conference room, 5 judges sat at a long table, the Judicial Conduct Committee, tasked with maintaining the integrity of the bench. Among them was Sarah Chen, whose slight nod reassured Elaine that she wasn't facing this alone. "Judge Montgomery," began Judge Alina Patel, the committee chair, "we're here to review your actions in the case of Commonwealth v. Wilson, specifically your decision to set aside a jury verdict based on a previously undisclosed conflict of interest. Before we begin, do you have a statement prepared?" "I do, Your Honor," Elaine replied. "But recent developments have altered what I feel I need to say today." A murmur ran through the committee members. "What developments?" Judge Patel asked, her expression guarded. Elaine took a deep breath. "Information has come to my attention suggesting that Marcus Wilson is not just legally innocent but factually innocent of the crimes charged, and that his prosecution is the result of police corruption." The room fell silent. "That's a serious allegation," Judge Hargrove said, leaning forward. "What evidence supports it?" "Evidence that has been turned over to the FBI," Elaine replied carefully. "I believe an investigation is currently underway." Judge Patel exchanged glances with her colleagues. "Judge Montgomery, while this committee is concerned with your conduct, not the guilt or innocence of the defendant, such information is certainly relevant to our deliberations. However, without specific details." A knock at the door interrupted her. A court officer entered and approached Judge Patel, whispering something in her ear. "It seems," Judge Patel announced after the officer retreated, "that representatives from the FBI are here and wish to address this committee. Given the unusual circumstances, I'm inclined to grant their request. Any objections?" There were none. Moments later, 2 individuals entered, a tall black woman in a crisp suit and an older white man with the weathered look of a career investigator. They introduced themselves as Special Agent Daniels and Special Agent Thompson. "We apologize for the interruption," Agent Daniels began, "but we felt it important to provide context for what Judge Montgomery has raised." "Please proceed," Judge Patel invited. "Our office has been investigating Detective James Carson of the Narcotics Division for several months," Agent Daniels explained. "Yesterday, based on evidence recently obtained, we executed search warrants at multiple locations, including Detective Carson's residence and a storage facility. The evidence recovered corroborates allegations of a long-running corruption scheme involving Carson and several other officers." "And how does this relate to Commonwealth v. Wilson?" Judge Hargrove asked. Our investigation indicates that Marcus Wilson was deliberately framed for a robbery committed by Detective Carson himself, Agent Thompson replied. We have audio recordings confirming this, as well as other documentary evidence. The committee members exchanged shocked glances. This morning, Agent Daniels continued, we arrested Detective Carson and 2 other officers. We've also been in contact with District Attorney Davies, who has agreed to file a motion to dismiss all charges against Mr. Wilson immediately. Elaine felt a surge of relief so powerful she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. Judge Montgomery, Agent Daniels turned to her, we would like to speak with you after this hearing, if possible. Your insights into this case could be valuable to our ongoing investigation. Of course, Elaine agreed. After the FBI agents departed, the committee members conferred quietly among themselves before Judge Patel addressed Elaine again. In light of these extraordinary developments, this committee will need to reconsider the scope of our review. While your failure to recuse yourself initially remains a matter of concern, the context now suggests your subsequent actions may have been instrumental in preventing a severe miscarriage of justice. I appreciate that, Your Honor, Elaine replied. But I want to be clear. I did not know about Detective Carson's corruption when I made my decision in court. I acted solely on the basis of my recognition of Mr. Wilson and my concern that it might have influenced my handling of the case. Then why did you choose such a public and dramatic method of recusal? Judge Hargrove asked, skepticism evident in his tone. Elaine considered the question carefully. Because something felt wrong about the case from the beginning, the rush to judgment, the eagerness to accept a convenient narrative that fit existing biases. I couldn't articulate it then, but I knew in my heart that the system had failed Mr. Wilson. My decision was an attempt to correct that failure, even at personal cost. Judge Patel nodded slowly. Judge Montgomery, this committee will need time to deliberate on these new circumstances. We'll reconvene next week to deliver our findings. Until then, your voluntary leave of absence remains in effect. As the hearing concluded, Elaine felt a strange mixture of vindication and uncertainty. The truth about Marcus Wilson's case had emerged, but the consequences for her career remained unclear. Outside the conference room, she found Sarah waiting. You knew the FBI was coming, Elaine said, not a question but a statement. I may have mentioned to my contact that the Judicial Conduct Committee was meeting this morning, Sarah admitted with a small smile. The timing seemed fortuitous. Thank you, Elaine said simply. Don't thank me yet, Sarah cautioned. The committee still has to rule on your conduct. And while the outcome of the Wilson case certainly helps your position, the fact remains that you should have recused yourself immediately upon recognizing him. I know, and I'll accept whatever consequence comes from that mistake. Sarah studied her friend's face. You don't regret it, do you? Any of it? Failing to recuse myself immediately? Yes, that I regret, Elaine replied honestly. But what came after? No. If I hadn't done what I did, Marcus might still be facing charges and Carson might still be operating with impunity. As they walked together through the courthouse corridors, Elaine's phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Judge Marcus Wilson has been released. His attorney said he's asking to speak with you. Elaine showed the message to Sarah, who shook her head. Still ethically questionable, she warned. But at this point, I doubt the committee would fault you for it. Would you? Elaine asked. Sarah considered the question. The judge in me says no. The friend in me says some rules matter less than others. Elaine smiled. I'll keep that in mind. The recreation center where Marcus Wilson worked part-time was housed in a renovated industrial building on the edge of the Riverside neighborhood. When Elaine arrived that afternoon, she found him in the gymnasium, supervising a group of middle school boys playing basketball. He looked different out of prison garb, taller, more confident. His resemblance to the serious 8-year-old boy she remembered now merely an echo rather than a direct reflection. He spotted her immediately, said something to one of the other adults, and jogged over to where she stood by the entrance. Judge Montgomery, he greeted her, his expression cautious but not unfriendly. Mr. Wilson, she replied. I understand you wanted to speak with me. He gestured toward a set of bleachers away from the court. If you have a few minutes. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the boys play. It was Marcus who finally broke the silence. My grandmother told me about your meeting, about giving you the storage unit address. She took a significant risk. We both did, Marcus acknowledged. But I remembered what you taught us in 3rd grade about standing up for what's right, even when it's scary. Elaine felt a surge of emotion at the thought that her words had stayed with him all these years. You remembered me immediately in court, didn't you? Yes, how could I forget? You were the teacher who changed everything for me. He paused, watching as one of the boys made a basket and his teammates cheered. You know, I was studying criminal justice at community college before all this happened, wanted to become a public defender. That's still possible, Elaine observed. Perhaps more meaningful now, given your experience. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Maybe right now I'm just trying to get my life back on track. He turned to look at her directly. I wanted to thank you for believing in me then and for having the courage to do what you did now. I made mistakes, Marcus. I should have recused myself immediately. If you had, I might still be in jail, he pointed out. Sometimes doing the wrong thing for the right reason is the only way to get to justice. The statement gave Elaine pause. Was that true? Had her ethical lapse ultimately served a greater good, or was that just a convenient rationalization? What will you do now? She asked, steering the conversation away from philosophical waters. Keep working with these kids, Marcus replied, gesturing toward the court. Try to be for them what you were for me, someone who sees their potential, not just their circumstances. Before Elaine could respond, one of the boys called out to Marcus, asking him to settle a dispute about a play. Duty calls, he said, rising from the bleachers. Judge Montgomery, thank you for everything. As he jogged back to the court, Elaine remained seated, watching as he patiently explained something to the boys, who listened with rapt attention. In that moment, she saw not just the child he had been or the defendant he became, but the man he was now, shaped by his experiences, both good and bad, yet not defined by them. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, committee scheduled final ruling for next Tuesday, looking positive based on FBI testimony. Whatever came next, whether a formal reprimand, a suspension, or complete exoneration, Elaine knew she could face it with a clear conscience. She had upheld her deepest commitment to justice, even when doing so meant challenging the very system she had sworn to serve. As she left the recreation center, Elaine paused at the door for one last look at Marcus Wilson, now fully engaged in the basketball game, laughing as he blocked a shot from one of the taller boys. Their paths had crossed twice, first in a classroom and then in a courtroom, each time changing the course of both their lives. Justice, Elaine reflected, was not just found in courtrooms and legal precedents. Sometimes it emerged from the messy, complicated connections between people, from recognizing each other's humanity across time and circumstance, and from having the courage to act on that recognition, whatever the cost. If you found meaning in this exploration of justice, ethics, and the power of human connection, please consider subscribing to @Persifistories. We're dedicated to creating narratives that challenge, inspire, and prompt reflection on the complex moral questions we all face. What choices would you make if faced with Judge Montgomery's dilemma? Share your thoughts in the comments below and join our community of thoughtful storytellers and listeners.